What if I told you that Ferrari tried to silence the worst technical problem that Lewis Hamilton has lived in his career? Today you will discover why Hungary 2025 may have marked a breakpoint in its era with Ferrari. Friday's day at Hungaroring began like any other, but it quickly became the stage where the facade carefully built by Ferrari began to crumble. Lewis Hamilton, the star signing of the team for this 2025 season, went on track hoping to consolidate the improvements promised by engineers in Maranello. What he found was exactly the opposite, a car that not only had not advanced, but showed clear symptoms of structural regression. In the first free session, the SF25 already gave signs of balance problems, but it was in the FP2 where the real drama broke out. Hamilton, a pilot who rarely gets carried away by frustration in front of the media, emerged from the car with a gesture of unmistakable tiredness. In statements that rumbled in all the garages, he described his day as very, very bad, finishing with a sentence that will go down in history: "Today was a big, big problem." These words were not a simple emotional relief. They were a direct accusation to the bowels of Ferrari's technical project. When pointing out that the car is inconsistent curve after curve, Hamilton did not talk about a bad setup or a wrong configuration. He talked about something much more serious, a concept of concept-based design mechanical architecture. In terms of Formula One engineering, this suggests that the distribution of weight, the center of gravity, or even the SF25 suspension system could be poorly integrated or underdeveloped. The fact that Hamilton said it publicly is a clear sign that internally the team has reached a dead point. Communication between pilot and engineers, which in winning teams is usually fluid and proactive, in Ferrari has begun to show signs of tension. It is not just a complicated car to drive. It is a car that does not deliver consistent answers to the pilot's actions. In technical jargon, it is a chassis that does not communicate, a platform that does not transmit. And the most disconcerting is that this occurs in the circuit where Hamilton has forged his legend. In Hungaroring, Lewis has dominated with Mercedes for more than a decade, reaping 8 victories and multiple poles. It is your talisman circuit. But on this occasion, that place of glory became a relentless mirror that returned the image of a broken car, of a failed technical project. That's why the impact was so great. It wasn't just a bad Friday. It was the public finding that something is very bad in Ferrari, and that you can no longer hide. Once the emotional shock of the statements is overcome, what comes next is the raw analysis of what is failing. Because the problem is not that Hamilton has had a bad day. Technically, the SF25 is a car that cannot be driven to the limit consistently. And this, in Formula One, is a conviction. During the first and second training session, Ferrari's technical team tried multiple changes in car configuration. The stabilizer bars were worked on, the heights of the front and rear suspension were altered, and the attack angles of the ailerons were adjusted in the hope of improving the general balance. But none of that gave conclusive results. The feedback that Hamilton returned to his engineers was clear. Each Hungaroring curve presented a reaction different from the car. And when that happens, you are facing a structural, not superficial problem. In other words, it is not about lack of grip, but that the car does not deliver the grip predictably. You can have aerodynamic load, but if it manifests asymmetrically or with irregular peaks between the entrance, the vertex and the curve output, the pilot loses any reliable reference. And that was exactly the British claim. Sometimes the car quickly run into slow curves. In others, it was unexpected at high speed. There was no clear trend. Only chaos. At this point, the main suspect is the design of the suspension. Ferrari opted for a reinterpretation of the front pushrod and rear pull rod that, in theory, should improve the contact of the wheels with the asphalt in technical circuits such as the Hungarian. However, what they have generated is a geometry that changes too much with dynamic compression. That means that as the car moves vertically through the pianos or when braking and accelerating, the wheels do not maintain uniform contact with the track. This breaks the connection between what the pilot expects and what really happens under his feet. But the problem does not end there. The brake-by-wire distribution system, which had already shown signs of instability in low-speed circuits, also gave intermittent failures during the FP2. Hamilton reported a loss of feeling when stopping in Curve 5 and in the famous Curve 11, a critical point of Hungaroring. The car not only did not stop constantly, but also maintained longitudinal stability under pressure. Ferrari has tried to hide this unstable behavior under the story of a sensitive to setup, but the data does not lie. Neither with new soft tires, nor with light fuel loads, not even with a gum track at the end of the session, Hamilton could approach the ideal pace that was expected of the SF25. The car simply does not respond. And if he does not respond to Hamilton, then who will he do it? In the same car with identical track conditions, fuel loading and tires, Leclerc managed to position himself in third place during both free training sessions in Hungary. Hamilton, on the contrary, could only climb to sixth place, dragging a gap of more than 3/10 with respect to his teammate. On a grill as tight as the current one, 3/10 are an eternity. But more than time, what hurts is the context. Charles Leclerc is not any pilot. It is a reference talent with an intuitive adaptation capacity to unstable cars, something that has perfected since its early years in Ferrari. But even recognizing that, the distance that is marking with respect to Hamilton is overwhelming. Monegasco seems to have found a way of living with the deficiencies of the SF25, hugging its defects and maximizing how little the car can offer. His is a fine adjustment conduction. It constantly adapts to the steering wheel in the braking at the curve entrance. He knows when to be aggressive and when to go back. In an inconsistent car, that ability to recalibrate can constantly make a difference between success and disaster. And that's what we are seeing. Hamilton, on the contrary, is still in the process of deciphering the internal logic of the SF25. And that is reflected not only in times, but in their body language, in its tone of voice, in the way it describes driving. He says the car makes no sense. That cannot predict how it will react in the following curve. That the relationship between curve and output entry is a lottery. And for someone who has built their domain in the hybrid era based on absolute trust in car behavior, this loss of control is devastating. We have already seen it before. Pilots like Vettel, Alonso, or even Raikkonen lived this emotional disconnection with Ferrari in their last years. The lack of a culture of technical responsibility led to personal wear, to accumulated frustration, and ultimately at anticipated exits. Hamilton runs the risk of falling into that same loop. If Ferrari does not admit that he has a systemic problem, and if he does not give the British the power to redirect development, the link will break from within. What happened in Hungary was not a simple bad day for Ferrari. It was a clear notice that the title aspirations of one of the most powerful teams in history are at real risk. But this problem not only affects Maranello. The implications extend throughout the championship, modifying dynamics, strategies, and the perception of strength of the leading teams in this 2025 season. Hamilton's technical debacle is not just an individual frustration. It is a strategic opportunity for the rest. The opponent teams are analyzing each telemetry with magnifying glass, each Ferrari return, to understand to what extent the SF25 has touched the roof. If it is confirmed that the car has structural limitations, such as erratic behavior in combined braking or aerodynamic imbalance in medium curves, then Ferrari's competitiveness window narrows drastically. This modifies the approaches of the championship. McLaren not only runs to win, now runs to distance a Ferrari that seems to sink. Red Bull, with the recovery of Verstappen and the arrival of Tsunoda, can adapt its strategy knowing that one of the main contestants has a structural weak point. But the most important thing is what this means in psychological terms. Hamilton, as a media figure and elite pilot, influences the general perception of paddock. If he transmits distrust, if he publicly denounces design failures, if he suggests that the team is lost, that signal extends. Sponsors, media, even Ferrari's internal staff begins to question the course of the project. And that noise reaches the strategy room. A team under pressure does not decide clearly. A team that feels that it has lost control begins to improvise. Will Hamilton continue committed to Ferrari if this inconsistency pattern continues? Or are we attending, without knowing it yet, at the beginning of the last chapter of his elite career? The 2025 Hungary Grand Prix has left us more than times in the sensationalist table or headlines. He has offered us a raw window to a truth that Ferrari can no longer hide. His technical project is in crisis and is just when he promised. Lewis Hamilton, one of the most meticulous, analytical, and successful pilots in the modern history of Formula One, has reached the limit of his patience. And when a competitor of that caliber, with a reputation built on excellence, begins to raise his voice, it is because he has already tried everything that was within his reach. What is at stake is not only the competitiveness of a mythical team, but the credibility of a project that sold illusion to millions of tifosi around the world. Ferrari did not hire Hamilton only for his titles, but for his ability to lead a team towards a new era. But that transition cannot exist if the car does not allow it to compete on equal terms. A winning era cannot be built on an unpredictable chassis, a silent technical direction, and a culture that refuses the internal conflict instead of facing it. What do you think? Because this sport feeds on both analysis and passion. Do you think Hamilton made a mistake when leaving Mercedes? Do you think Ferrari has a real reaction margin, or is it too late to straighten this project? Is Charles Leclerc silently consolidating his status as Maranello's absolute leader? And above all, what do you think will happen if the solution that Hamilton needs